Hey, welcome to GTFOutcast. It's been a while, but I'm still Bo.
I'm still Taylor.
Good, good to see you again, Taylor.
Likewise, likewise. I believe this week we're actually both in Las Vegas for In-N-Out Burger Con. Is that correct?
Yeah, In-N-Out Burger Con. Once you get west of whatever the dividing line is between not In-N-Out Burger and In-N-Out Burger, I guess you can kind of trade off Chick-fil-A and In-N-Out Burger. Uh,
Mm,
they're both delicious, but mutually exclusive, it seems.
yeah, pretty tough comparison though. But yes, I see what you're saying. So it's funny. We're both in the same city, and although we were having breakfast together this morning, we are actually I guess we're about 20 miles apart now. So it seemed most appropriate to pick up where we left off with a good old Google Hangout.
Absolutely. Get each other back in that small frame so we can, not have too much human contact.
Yeah, exactly. We're hackers. Hey, So today, what do you think about let's just catch up and kind of see where we've been and what we've been doing since last we spoke? And frankly, I'm
Yeah.
not even sure that I remember when last we spoke on this podcast, but we can probably do some good gap fill.
Yes, definitely. So I'll kick it off. In the last few months, since I think we talked last, I've moved into Brooklyn formally and officially. I think I was getting ready to move back then, but moved in, had some trials and tribulations finding a place to actually live. Learned some things about the New York housing market that I didn't want to have to know, but I'm there now. Um, and so I'll give a quick update on that after I throw it over to you. Then I want to go and just talk about a few tips that I've found over the past couple of months that either were new to me and I think are pretty cool, or reinforce things that I had known and maybe just hadn't said yet. So, Taylor, what's the 50,000 foot view on your world?
Yeah, so that's great, and I'm interested in hearing more. For us, it's been a bit of a frantic race across the country. Beth and I, we learned that it takes a fair bit of planning to do this, and as we considered several different itineraries to get from East Coast to the West Coast, once we considered the fact that we had to be in Vegas for DEF CON pretty much now, we realized we only had so much time to get from point A to point B, and so ultimately we arrived at the conclusion that we wanted to see a few specific places. So namely, we wanted to get to Yellowstone, we wanted to see Grand Teton National Park. We had to stop off in South Dakota to get our driver's licenses and kind of complete the residency process. So that's really what our past few months have been about. They've been about getting from the southeast. We wintered in Florida and passed back through Atlanta. Getting from the southeast up to South Dakota, and then basically over to Yellowstone, to spend enough time there before having to begin our path back down here towards Vegas. And we've encountered some pretty interesting things along the way. We've had a few revelations and learned a few lessons, and we've had a few bumps and hiccups over the past, really the past 36, 48, 72 hours for that matter. But again, I'll go into a little bit more detail once you had an opportunity to tell us more about your Brooklyn exploits.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear about your RV-lations. Um, yeah, so quickly to encapsulate my last few months of moving, I finally was able to move into a place on about 2 weeks ago, a little over 2 weeks ago now. Was supposed to move in over a month ago, but the guy who was going to sublet it to me apparently got caught for subletting, and his landlord basically told him, "I'm going to evict you." So that didn't work out so well. Although once he was able to actually talk to his landlord, communicate, and say, "Look, here's what's going to happen. I know this guy." Kind of get things explained a little bit better. The landlord ended up being fairly okay with it, as long as it means no disruption in payment. It means a few other things. And I think that one of the reasons why it was able to work out is apparently the eviction process in New York takes well over a year. So it could be well over a year between when somebody deserves to be evicted and when they can legally be thrown out. Which means if you want to be a deadbeat, you move in, and as long as you're there for 30 days, you don't have to ever pay again, and they can't throw you out for like a year, which
Wow,
I
that's
don't
pretty insane.
understand. But Okay, good to know for future reference. I don't plan on doing that, but once he got it straightened out with his landlord, it was cool. I was able to move in, get the key, and take possession of the place. So it's been a good couple of weeks exploring that part of the city, seeing all the things that there are to do. I've spent a lot of time in downtown Manhattan. Getting around the subways has been a challenge. At night they change over and it's completely different rules and it's like chaos. There's signs that seem designed to be confusing about what trains run when at night and during the day, and I don't know. It's one of those where it helps if you've spent more than a couple of weeks in the city to get your bearings. But I haven't died yet, so that's a positive thing. Something I learned about renting property, subletting especially. I did it through Airbnb, or Taylor, I know you like VRBO. When you do that in a big city, it's fairly easy to find places for 1 night, 2 night, a week, 2 weeks, maybe up to a month. But if you go out more than that, you run into a problem where people already have it rented in like October and it's January, just because somebody has, somebody's a planner, which I don't understand that whole like I like to plan things phenomenon, but some people do, I guess. So they plan out several months in advance, and you might find that one of the cool places you want might be taken. I ran into a similar issue in Mexico City looking for a place, but it was nowhere near what New York was. And I think one reason is because a lot of people apparently come to New York for the summer, summer internship, or hey, I want to take a summer when I'm not going to be in college and go live in New York for 3 months or whatever. So it was tough finding a place long term through the summer. I say long term. It's not long enough to officially qualify for a real grown-up lease, which typically those start at a year. And so there's this weird unserved market or underserved market of people who just want to rent for 3 to 6 months.
Right.
A couple of sites have tried to fill that gap, Airbnb being one of them. There's a site called sublet.com, which I had really mixed results on. I had a few people who were going to rent to me, but they seemed surprised that I wanted it furnished. It's like, I'm only going to be here 3 months. That's kind of what I thought this site was about, but apparently it's not. So there's not a great way to do it just except for trial and error. Although one thing I did learn is location matters a lot in a lot of these types of places, a lot of the cities, especially if you don't have a car, which I don't. And cars are more of a liability than an asset in a lot of the cities. Sure. But I spent the first 2 to 3 weeks just traveling around, go get on the subway, hop off somewhere, walk around, see what I like, see what I don't like, get a feeling for the area. Then I looked at places on a couple of the sites, went and met with the people in those areas, and saw the actual places that I might be moving into, talked to them about costs, and negotiated in the case of where I'm living now. I started out, he was asking about $2,600 a month, and now I'm paying about $1,600 a month. Part of the reason is, we're not going through some of these systems that would require him to pay taxes on the subletting that he's doing, which you shouldn't have to anyways, but Airbnb, for instance, just automatically takes it out. Yeah. It takes it out of what you pay and pays it on your behalf. So negotiation is key in this, getting a place that you can afford. I learned that pretty quickly because there was really nothing that I could afford, and even in Brooklyn. We had a friend who had a similar experience in Manhattan, and he had a really tiny place, and he was paying about $3,000 a month, and then it burned down.
Yeah.
So that was not a good experience for him.
No, that was a pretty shocking situation. I didn't realize he was paying that much for the tiny little place they had, but I guess that's Manhattan. So it sounds like public transportation is also pretty key, because if you don't have a car, if you hadn't been in New York, for instance, trying to do that in a city like Atlanta, public transportation wouldn't really get you very far. You wouldn't really be able to go and explore neighborhoods very effectively if you didn't have a good subway system. So.
Right. Yeah, and I think that for each city, getting around will be different. I know in Mexico City there were really only 3 or maybe 4 areas that were really viable for me to live in as somebody who doesn't speak a lot of Spanish and who wasn't entirely comfortable in the Mexican culture and with the different barrios. So I tried to stick to 3 or 4 different distinct places that I knew were good and that would be safe for me. In Brooklyn, you have a little bit of that, but there's dozens and dozens and dozens of little neighborhoods within Brooklyn proper. The one that I settled down in is it's called Fort Greene or Clinton Hill. It's right on the edge of those two, and it's a good, safe area that I enjoy. Lots of things to do. It's close to transport links. It's really close to some good restaurants, some good bars, tons of little bodegas, so you can go down and get some coffee if you run out. You can get like a little deli sandwich for fairly inexpensive. But yeah, it's I like the feeling of being close to conveniences, and yet in a quieter area. There's not that many cars that go down my street, for instance.
So one thing you didn't mention, but I'll just throw this out there as a tip to those watching this. I know you said you don't have a car, and I think in New York you're absolutely right. Having a car is probably more of a liability than it is a benefit. Although I haven't used it as much over the last 8 months because we travel in an RV and we tow a car full time now. One thing that I have made pretty effective use of while traveling prior to this is Zipcar. When we're in cities where I don't want to have to rent a car for a week from a major rental provider, and I don't want to have to pay for taxis and black cars for an hour at a time. At least in certain cities, the availability of Zipcar is pretty good, and the cost works out rather well because when you're using Zipcar, the flat hourly rate that you pay basically includes both fuel and insurance. So there's like a little gas card in the car. You just fill it up. If it gets below a quarter tank, you drop it back off, and you're good to go. And so by way of example, we used Zipcar pretty extensively when we were in D.C. visiting my stepson last year. There are Zipcars pretty much all over Atlanta. So if you were going through this process in a place like Atlanta or D.C. Or even New York, where maybe you've got to stray out beyond the area that the subway reaches, it's probably worth investigating. I don't remember the actual annual cost for Zipcar. I'm a member of a group called Founders Card, and so through Founders Card, I get a discount on my Zipcar membership. But I want to say Zipcar is about $50 a year just for the membership itself, and then you pay generally $8 to $12 an hour to rent a car. They're also typically pretty nice cars. They're not the bare bones models that a lot of the rental car agencies typically provide for the compact and economy rentals. So anyway, just put it out there that again, if somebody were going through the process and needed to really go explore neighborhoods, being able to rent a car for like 3 hours at a time with prepaid gas and the ability to go drop it back off and do that almost on demand is pretty awesome. It's kind of the Airbnb of car rentals in a sense.
Yeah, that's good. Good tip. I haven't used Zipcar, but I know other people who have, and it's very effective for what it is.
Yeah, I like it.
I'll throw it over to you to update us on what you've been up to the past few months. Tell us about your RVlations.
Yeah, so our RVlations, well, it's been pretty interesting. So we wintered in Florida, and again, we kind of got all the way up to spring before we realized, oh my God, we didn't mean to spend this long in Florida. We turned around, we went back through Atlanta briefly, spent a couple weeks visiting with family and friends, and at that point in time, we kind of had an idea of how we wanted to get to the north Midwest part of the country before, again, ultimately heading down here towards Las Vegas for DEF CON. So initially we thought, well, we'll go up the East Coast, we'll go up through New England, and we'll kind of cruise across the southern states, around the Great Lakes, and make our way over to South Dakota. Again, we needed to stop off in South Dakota to kind of finish up our residency process. And then from there we'll bounce over to Yellowstone. So we sat down, we started doing the math, we started looking at the calendar and the maps and the mileage, and we said, I don't think the timeline's actually going to work out. Starting in spring, trying to make it to Yellowstone, spend time in Yellowstone, and then make it down to Vegas by now was going to be a bit of a challenge. So then we started looking at, okay, what is the most direct route that doesn't take us through inhospitable parts of the country? In other words, how can we get to South Dakota without spending too much time in Tornado Alley and then, basically bounce our way over to the national parks from there? So without going into extraneous detail, one thing that I will say, and I've actually got the beginnings of a series of blog posts about this over at thelearningbanks.com, which is where Beth and I are blogging about our journeys, but there's a real dearth of trip planning resources that aggregate all of the data you need to do something like what we're doing. And what I mean by that, there's a lot of variables that go into this, in addition to basic trip routing like mileage, distance and time calculations, taking into account things like fuel costs and, how often am I going to be able to find the gas stations that I have, a membership card or a credit card with that are going to save me the most money on gas. And then really where things get really interesting are when you get to things like bridge clearances and road grades. And that's something that, if you're traveling in a passenger car, there are things that may never really occur to you. It doesn't matter if a bridge clearance is 12 feet when you're driving in a 6-foot tall car. Even a 10% road grade doesn't matter in a small car that's not carrying a lot of weight.
Right.
But when you're driving a vehicle that's 13 feet tall, 10 feet wide, 34 feet long, and weighs 18,000 pounds, plus, you're tugging along a 4,500-pound four-wheel drive miniature SUV, all of a sudden, these low bridges and these steep grades really matter. So we started trying to figure a lot of this out kind of as we were going. Maybe a topic for another podcast or a sidebar sometime. We kind of got unintentionally delayed in Nashville. We went to get some minor work done on our RV, nothing that was really mechanically necessary other than potentially inspection of the brakes. We knew before going into the mountains we wanted to have the brakes checked out. To Lebanon, Tennessee, and essentially the folks that were going to do the work for us kind of implied they'd have us in and out, and after 2 weeks of living in their parking lot, we finally managed to get on the road from Lebanon and continue our journey. So
wow.
As we passed from Tennessee through Missouri, Missouri to Kansas, Kansas to Nebraska, Nebraska to South Dakota, we realized, one, it's pretty impossible to truly avoid weather. You can kind of dodge weather, and you can kind of plan around where you think the weather is going to be. But, and I apologize in advance to any meteorologists watching or listening to our podcast, but meteorologists are pretty shitty at their jobs, and apparently they don't actually know where the weather's going to be. And when you're driving a giant, long, heavy house that has the tendency to blow over or float away, and everything you own is inside of it, it gets a little scary. So, the first thing we really encountered was trying to plot weather along our route, and there's a great tool just for plotting weather along the route. Then we realized that we were going up some pretty steep hills, and we found one or two tools that specifically deal with where the road grades are, how they need to be driven, and what needs to be avoided. We considered bridge clearances, and there's yet another tool that focuses on avoidance of low clearances and making sure you don't get stuck in an area where your only option is to go under a low bridge. Sadly, none of these tools are really very well integrated. So it's been a pretty interesting learning process as we figured out how to kind of overlay all of these data points, one on top of another. And we've got the process pretty well down now, but it's still pretty cumbersome and time-consuming. Every time we want to go somewhere, we really do have to sit down with about 3 or 4 tools, and we start out by first saying, where are we going and what's the basic route look like? How long is that going to take? Okay, what's the weather going to look like along that route? Now let's plot out road grades and bridge clearances, and then after doing all of this massaging, we end up with a rough route, and of course, halfway along that route, inevitably something's going to change, and we get to start all over again. So That's been the process. The past few days have been kind of interesting. We've unfortunately encountered more damage to our RV in the past 72 hours than in the basically the year that we've owned it prior to now. We had a little incident that damaged the rear driver's side quarter panel, fender, and bumper. We've developed a crack in the windshield, and the auto park mechanism, which is apparently a pretty strangely designed auto engagement of the parking brake feature that is found in a lot of these this period RV, gas engine. Apparently, these things are not the most fantastically designed, and ours has failed. We're not yet sure the extent of the damage that really has occurred in the process of the failing. So we've made our way to Vegas now, and frankly, the good news is we're now on the other side of this deadline, and that's actually a really nice feeling. We didn't ever intend to feel rushed in doing what we're doing, and yet we kind of did because of our poor planning. So we ended up rushing to South Dakota. We spent a couple of weeks in South Dakota. I got to say, the Badlands are totally amazing. The Black Hills State Park is phenomenally beautiful. We've got pictures of bison and bears and elk and deer and pronghorn antelopes and all sorts of things that will eventually make their way onto our blog. We made our way across Wyoming and Montana. Yellowstone and the Grand Tetons are beautiful. And now here we are in Vegas, in this hot desert hell, getting ready for this fantastic annual hacker convention that you and I both congregate in this lovely city for.
Yeah. Cool. I do want to take a little bit of umbrage with saying that meteorologists are horrible at their jobs. As somebody who studied meteorology in college for a couple of years, I can tell you that it's hard to do. And if you asked probably anybody at the conference we're getting ready to go to whether we were better than meteorologists, I think we'd probably begrudgingly say, yeah, not so much. So, it's easy to pick on meteorologists, but they actually have repeatable science, whereas we just have, maybe over there, spend a few $1 million, see if that works. I don't know. Let me go cash this paycheck. But I understand what you mean. Weather can be frustrating. It's especially frustrating for the meteorologist.
Yes, I can imagine. It's equally frustrating to find meteorologists and their excellent ability to predict weather patterns retroactively. Like, oh yes, and here's where it went. I guess that you're right, though. There's probably a lot of similarity there with the InfoSec space as well. So.
Yeah, if our models were as good as their, oh wait, we don't have any models at all. So let's just throw that out the window. They do have some cool tools. They have cooler toys than we do. I mean, they actually have big data. We really don't. So if you ever get the chance to talk to a meteorologist about their computer tools, they will keep you in awe and jealousy. So
why are you not a meteorologist? I'm sorry.
What's that?
I said, so why is it that you're not a meteorologist? I'm asking.
Because you kind of have to be in one place for a while, and the pay isn't quite as good as doing what I do now.
All right, fair enough.
That whole exactitude thing, it's overrated.
Yeah, I hear you.
So tell me about this South Dakota residency thing.
So this is something that I guess is actually rather, maybe commonplace isn't the right word, but it's popular in and amongst the full-time RV community for a couple of reasons. The very short, the TLDR summary version is South Dakota is very welcoming and hospitable to folks that are not residing there full-time. So the process of getting a driver's license and establishing residency in South Dakota is a bit easier than in other states, combined with the fact that South Dakota does not have a state income tax, and the fact that they actually have rather low annual vehicle taxes makes it particularly attractive when you've got a pretty expensive vehicle that you also call your domicile. So it's pretty straightforward. In our case, we actually found a company, and I think I mentioned them. You and I did an episode where we talked about mail forwarding services. We use a mail forwarding service out of South Dakota known as America's Mailbox, and they actually helped us a lot with the process because they are not only our mail forwarding service, they are technically our address of residence. And in addition, because they provide the service for so many full-time RVers, or full-time nomads, I should say, they will even go through a lot of the difficult processes for you. So, for instance, when it came time to do our vehicle registration, we basically did a limited power of attorney and mailed it to them, and they actually went to the tag office for us in person, completed the process, dropped off the paperwork, paid with a cashier's check, and then mailed us our license plate for our vehicle. When we passed through South Dakota, technically the only real requirement was that we had to stay there for one night and have a receipt showing proof that we had resided in one place for one night, and that's what enabled us to get our driver's licenses. So we were there for much more than one night because we stayed in the Badlands, because we did go explore the Black Hills, area. But for the purpose of becoming residents of South Dakota, it literally took little more than having an address through this company and basically staying one evening at their provided campground, and then driving down to the tag office. Frankly, even the process of getting a driver's license there was extremely efficient. Sadly, we arrived right at lunchtime, so when we arrived, everybody had just taken break, and we did wait for probably 45 minutes to an hour until everybody got back from lunch. But once they got back from lunch, the process of getting our South Dakota driver's licenses took probably about 15 minutes tops. So that said, it's pretty neat. I never really thought much of South Dakota prior to this. I guess it was probably just really ignorance, quite frankly. It's a pretty amazing place, and I feel like we really just scratched the surface when we drove up into the Badlands and then across through, Deadwood, Sturgis, and the Black Hills area. But what we did see of South Dakota was pretty mind-bogglingly beautiful. Nice people, some okay food, and some pretty amazing scenery. So I actually look forward to going back and spending some more time in my new state of residence. But for anybody that's that again kind of adopts a full-time nomad status like you and I would certainly recommend doing a little bit of research, and maybe we can pull together some of that research on the blog when I eventually get our domain back up again. But it's not terribly difficult, and again, South Dakota, because they don't have a state income tax, because they've got low vehicle, ad valorem, etc. taxes, it's a pretty nice place to call your home state when you don't have roots in a big, expensive, large square footage house somewhere else.
Cool, very cool. We'll have to see if maybe they can sponsor some of your trip, or at least some of our podcast.
Yeah, no kidding. Cool. Well, so I don't know. I feel like we've probably we've rambled on for probably a good 20-25 minutes. I don't know. Is there anything else we should cover for our excited listeners before we wrap up our call today?
Maybe just a couple of tips that I've learned really quickly, which is, first of all, disposable clothes are pretty cool when you don't have constant access to a laundry machine, or when, like I have in my neighborhood, they only do laundry 10 pounds at a time. So like I take home a bag that's like 4 pounds full of like almost all of my clothes, and they're like, you don't have enough clothes, come back when you have more. I'm like, no, that's like all the clothes I own except for what's on my body, and you don't want these because that nobody wants to see that. So grab an extra pair of jeans, and literally this shirt is Hanes undershirt, or somebody makes an undershirt. It's like $20 for a pack of 4. You don't have to really care what they look like. You don't have to worry about how well they wear, because it's like $5 a t-shirt, or you can hit the thrift store or whatever. But when you get someplace that you're going to be for a little while, grab some extra clothes that are disposable, and then when you move out, you can donate them somewhere, which is a cool thing too. And it saves you the hassle of always having to wash your stuff. And it saves you the wear and tear on the things you do want to keep.
Yeah, regarding the thrift store route, I think that's a pretty good tip, because one of the things you'll also find is when you're traveling, thrift stores typically have regionally appropriate clothing. So not only can you walk into a thrift store and spend $15, but you can spend $15 and buy clothing that is appropriate for the area. You're not going to find big, heavy-duty winter coats in Las Vegas, and you're not going to find T-shirts and shorts in northern Michigan. So thrift shops are a pretty cool way to kind of go about the same thing. Spend a couple of bucks, and then like you said, at the same time, when you roll out either there or at your next stop along the destination, you can take the clothes you've got, whether they're ones that you have owned originally or you picked up at the thrift shop, and put them right back into the process. So.
Absolutely. Yep. Great point. The other thing I wanted to bring up is on the subject of beard hygiene. I got a Gillette Fusion Pro Glide Styler a couple of years when I won Movember in London, which was a cool thing in and of itself. But this was one of the gifts, and it was just this super, super duper lightweight little shaver. And if I can get it out of this packaging, I'll show you. There it is. I recently had to get a new one because I forgot mine back in New York. And after 18 months or so, a couple of the attachments broke, so it was about time. But it's really small. It's waterproof, so it's got a cool casing. It runs on one AA battery, so no matter where you are, you don't have to worry about charging it overnight. You just run to the store and get a AA battery. And it works pretty well. It keeps my beard in check better than just about any other razor I've had. Fairly durable, and it's like $20, $25.
That's pretty
if
nice.
If you do end up shaving close to the skin really often, these blades, it comes with a blade attachment that it will vibrate the blade, and the like, I don't know, 25 blades that they have on this thing, whatever it is. Those are pretty expensive. It's like a 4-pack is like $20, so it's as expensive as my shirts, which is kind of crazy. But you don't have to use that. You can get disposable razors or whatever you're comfortable with. But it's a very, very cool, very, very lightweight option. Like I said, it weighs almost nothing. I mean, I think it weighs less than my phone, which can't be said about a lot of the portable devices out there.
So that's pretty slick, though, because that's actually both a little set of clippers and a razor. And technically, I use the non-disposable version of the Gillette Pro Glide. I've got a Mach 3 handle and a Pro Glide handle. I also have a separate little pair of clippers that I picked up somewhere else at a drugstore along the way. But as you just pointed out, one of the real nice things about that razor is that it runs off a AA battery. Mine has a proprietary little charger, and frankly, I'm really good at losing razor and clipper charger cables. So the fact that I've managed to keep mine for this long is great, but mine that is a dedicated clipper, although pretty cheap, it's not as compact as that one. So if you say the performance of that is actually pretty good, then I may have just found myself a new razor, especially since I can put my standard blades on it. That's pretty awesome.
Yep. Now, the only potential downside for you is if you're using this to clip your hair, they don't have very long attachments.
Yeah, I don't anymore. Typically, I'll actually go let somebody else clip my hair because they can do a better job than I. And for a while, I was picking up a pair of wall clippers every time, spend $16, and throw a guard on it and do it. But no, I just need something for basic facial hair and such maintenance. And but I do occasionally go all the way down to the skin. I don't really keep my beard up, so being able to move back and forth between clipper and razors is pretty awesome.
Yep. Good. Well, hopefully I've helped you.
Now, this episode brought to you by Gillette and In-N-Out Burger.
And the great state of South Dakota.
That's right. That's right. Cool. Well, those are great tips. I appreciate the info on the little. What'd you say that thing's called? It's the Gillette Pro Glide. What?
Gillette Fusion Pro Glide Styler.
Styler. All right.
Yeah, and like I said, it's waterproof, so you can take it in the shower. I wouldn't, dunk it underwater, but
right.
It holds up fairly well to getting in the shower. So that's always good.
Nice. Cool. Well, it's been good catching up with you. I think on a near future episode, we're going to have to get into the topic of grub. We had a pretty good pre-podcast discussion today about food, and we were both really doting on In-N-Out Burger, and it got me thinking that there's probably a lot of interesting things that I've also picked up about eating along the road, along the path as we travel along the road, and I bet you've got some pretty good tips too. So maybe we'll make that one of our near future podcast topics. And hey, we probably ought to do this more often.
Yeah, maybe once a week, once every couple of weeks, not like twice a year.
Yeah, that's probably good. I think our listeners and viewers would probably appreciate that.
Yeah, probably would.
Cool. Well, Bo, thanks for spending the time today. I know you've got a busy week ahead of you, and Beth and I do as well. I think we're all working the conference this year, so it's probably going to be a pretty frenetic week. But I look forward to bumping into you on one of the conference floors at some point in time between now and next Monday before we all escape Las Vegas.
Yep. Good talking to you, and see you this week.
Yeah, look forward to it.
All right. Until next time. Bye bye.
Ciao.